Australia seems like a place where aviation is so useful in the sense that you have big distances to go over, and if you live anywhere out in the desert areas and you're gonna want an airplane to go wherever
Yeah.
you're going to go. So aviation's integral to the life of Australia. All right, Joe Casey with the Malibu Guru Podcast and the Casey Aviation YouTube channel. And we're coming from a long way away today. We're talking with Carl Rossi, all the way from the continent of Australia. And I'm just so excited to have to do this podcast for so many reasons. But one of them is that we're able to do, in today's digital world, a long distance podcast. Carl Rossi, thank you so much for joining the Malibu Guru Podcast.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for having me. It should be a lot of fun.
And this is going to be a bunch of fun, I'm telling you right now. But, I will tell you, I have a serious love affair of Australia, even though I've never been there. I've traveled the world. I've been to 86 countries. I count them just because I think that's kind of a fun, factoid, I guess you'd say. There's, you don't get any brownie points for being to the most countries, but I don't know, 86, I kind of feel like it's a good number until you really compare it against some people that have been to, hundreds. And, but 86 is where I'm at. But one of them I've never been to is Australia or New Zealand or anything in the part of the world where you're sitting right now. So I'm super excited to talk with you about it and hear about your exploits and what all goes down in Australia.
Well, you definitely have to visit both places. I've had the fortune to be in both Australia and New Zealand. I don't know. Australia about 25 times in the last 2 decades. New Zealand, not enough. In both cases, I didn't want to come back. So Deanna managed to make it here, which of course led the genesis of this podcast. So you have to do it.
I'm telling you, Deanna got that flight to take a Phenom 300 all the way to Australia. It was like this. If you're a ferry pilot, it's like the dream of a lifetime to get the trip she got. Not only to take the coolest airplane in the world, but the furthest distance. I thought I held that record for a long time until Deanna whooped me and got that flight to Australia with a Phenom 300 the long way around. And really, she got that trip because the shorter way is to go across the North Pacific and then go down to Australia. But she had to go all the way across the North Atlantic and then down through Europe and the Middle East, across Asia and down into Australia. So I didn't get to take the trip. I still haven't been to Australia, but I'm coming. There's going to be, I don't know when, but I'm coming. So. Hey, before
you won't
we
be disappointed.
I promise you I won't.
You won't.
Hey, before we get started, tell me when aviation started with you.
Well, I actually started flying in 1987 and got my private right license then. And then as soon as I could, which was about 6 months later, so May of 1988, got my instrument rating, which I did in a 1975 Mooney M20F that I bought, which was a hoot. I mean, it still has a special place in my heart being first airplane. But when I look back on the equipment and such compared to what we're all spoiled with today, it seems like much closer to Lindbergh than the glass panels that we have. I've been,
airplanes that I first began to fly with. I can't believe what we did in those airplanes. I was birthed in aviation in 1990, and I can remember flying instruments on steam gauges and the stuff that today would be declared unsafe by today's standards. And here we were out there flying it. But I think it made me a better pilot in a lot of respects.
Well, I agree. I definitely agree. Definitely agree with that. I would not want to try to go from, modern glass cockpit back to a steam gauge airplane without having the steam gauge background, although we're going to talk about how Ann and I just spent 40 hours flying a very rudimentary by modern standards airplane around Northern Australia.
Yeah. Okay. Before you get there, though, I'm going to, you basically progressed from the Mooney to something else. When did you enter into the PA-46 world? Because eventually we're going to get to an M350, but where'd you go from out of that Mooney?
So out of that Mooney, I went to another Mooney. I went to a 231. This was about 1989. I'd moved back to California. I did my training in Illinois, Southern California by birth. I moved back to California and very rapidly realized that having a normally aspirated airplane in the Western United States is not a lot of fun, especially in the summertime. So I had the 231 for 3 or 4 years, and then I changed from that to a Cicada TB21 Turbo Trinidad, which is a pretty rare bird indeed.
Yes.
But even then, going back to when I was getting my private license, the FBO that I trained at in Illinois had a 1984 Malibu that was actually available for rent and lease back. And I mean, even at that point, I thought that's kind of interesting. Gosh, pressurization and not having to deal with oxygen, which ended up having to do a lot in the 231 and the TB21. So I actually got my first Malibu Mirage in 1996. I bought a 1993 Malibu Mirage and had it for just over 3 years. And it had a bit of a love-hate relationship with it, which I think was primarily, like that's airplanes, right? But a lot of it turned out, had to do with, I think, the original owners, the way he operated the airplane, despite the fact that it had 400, just over 400 hours on it when I purchased it. It was 3 years old. And I had, the pre-buys done by all the very, very good people out there. The plane was just kind of worn out. And, by the time I got to 900 hours, I'd gone that needed turbochargers, vacuum pumps, XYZ, and it just became too much of a headache to maintain it. So I actually went back and bought my TB21, the same airplane, back from the person I had sold it to, who, by the way, had purchased it from me because he had just sold his Malibu. And then, for the next 20, 25 years, whatever it was, went from the TB21 to a Columbia 400, 2006, which I bought new, which we still have. And then more recently, 2017 Cessna TTX, which we also still have, as I kept kind of a habit of collecting airplanes, but still wanted pressurization. I wanted weather radar. I wanted the ability to have a little more capability. Both Ann and I are pilots, which helps a lot. And we use the airplanes primarily to go from Southern California, either up to Oregon, to Eugene area, or Seattle. So, there's some fairly substantial terrain issues, weather issues you have to deal with on that route. And we like to we'd fly the Columbia and the TTX in the mid to high teens. And one day in about 2019, 2020, we were flying the TTX from Montgomery Field, where we're based, up to Eugene. We were at 16,000 feet going by Mount Shasta with our cannulas on. It was my leg. And Ann looked over at me. It was she had this kind of concerned look on her face, said, I am blank tired of wearing this fill in the blank cannula. Okay, okay, you know what that means. And then, that's right. And so from that, it was, let's put the wheels in motion to get the M350. Of all the planes we've owned, the last 3 that we've had have been new. And I've just had much more luck with them. Maybe it's luck. Maybe it's the fact it's one operator or 2 operators in our case, that we know how it's maintained. We know how the aircraft is, there are problems that get fixed, that I wanted to buy another. If I'm going to buy an airplane, it's give me a new airplane. So we went ahead and purchased the new M350 in June of 2021. And we've put just under 800 hours on it since.
So it sounds like it's been a really good airplane for you then.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, I hate it has, which is always the kiss of death in aircraft, right? But it has. We've taken it up and down the coast, I don't know, 25, 30 times. I've flown the airplane to the East Coast to go for work meetings. We flew it up to Churchill on Hudson Bay for a vacation trip a couple of years back. And the main difference really, compared to the Columbia and the TTX, the difference is not the speed. Both those aircraft are very high performance and they're very economical. And we're normally cruising them in the mid to high teens at 195, 200 knots, a real 60% power setting, 65%. Very, very good performance. The difference, of course, is, you well know, and anybody realizes once they get into pressurization, is that when you get out of a long flight in an unpressurized piston single, especially if you're up at altitude, you're beat up. You're tired, and you don't really look forward to, let's go get back in the plane and do the next leg. I literally have flown from South Florida back to Seattle in a day in the M350, leaving South Florida at 6 a.m, arriving back in Seattle 8:30 at night, whatever it was, and felt perfectly refreshed. This was great. It was comfortable. It's a whole different, literally, world. That plus having the weather radar. Ours was one of the first serial numbers where we could get the GWX 8000 upgrade, which I did. And compared to the radar I had in the original Mirage, where I spent most of my time messing with the tilt control, the automation, all nice. But the pressurization is really the primary benefit in my mind, and I think in Ann's mind. You just don't have the same fatigue issues that you do with a unpressurized aircraft.
Yeah. No, pressurization is an absolute game changer. There's zero doubt about it. And the pressurization in the PA-46 is really, really good. It's in other words, there's some airplanes out in the world like a P210 comes to mind where there's pressurization, but it's not that great. Sort of like you created an airplane from a different unpressurized airplane and tried to pressurize it. But, the PA-46 from day one was designed to be a pressurized airplane, and therefore it ends up being a great pressurized airplane. And the pressurization, in my opinion, is one of the best on the planet.
Yes, and now with the pressurization controller integrated into the G1000 NXI, it's even better. As you know, all you do is you set the destination elevation in when you're putting in your flight plan, and that's it. You're no longer dealing with the controller on the left-hand side of the panel, and hey, what does this little knob at about the 7 o'clock position do, and would I put it here, do I put it there? It really is seamless, it's one less thing from a workload standpoint to have to deal with. That's true with most of the integrated, flight tech now. In retrospect, it does make everything seem primitive, but that's where we're at.
So today you're at a TBM, a Piston model. You're at a TTX and an M350. Are you flying all three of those airplanes regularly?
Yeah, we do. The running joke, which again has a lot of jokes, has some cruel truth in it, is that the purpose of owning more than one airplane, especially having three, is that if you have three, it typically means that at least one is operational at all times, which has been the case. Do I need three? Two needs three. Nobody does, but we use the TTX for trips when the Malibu is not available for one reason or another, because it's also a Fiki aircraft. The 2006 Columbia 4, I put 3,200 something hours on it, and it just goes. And we have another trip that we do, which is only about a 30-minute trip, 45-minute trip, and we'll use that plane for it all the time. And those aircraft are simple. They fixed gear, simple systems, nice avionics. I just haven't had the need to give them up, so I haven't yet. And we debate it, but for the time being, we'll keep.
Yeah, well, evidently the rule is if you buy an airplane, you cannot sell it. So
I don't think you'd get any argument from Ann about that, because she was a TTX owner as well, and she ended up selling hers when we got the M350. Yeah.
Okay, so I got to make a diversion in here. Ann's a pilot. How do y'all get along in the cockpit?
I think very well. We're both have very similar personalities, which I think is good. Her background is engineering, although she was a patent attorney for Boeing for the majority of her career. But she's very engineering focused on the way that she flies. Very, very checklist oriented. Very, very good at doing her briefings. Very, very, very thorough, which I certainly like. And it definitely complements me. As far as if I miss something or she misses something. Plus the fact is it's great to have another person there to either split legs or, hey, if I want to take, I'm going to close my eyes for 10 minutes, go ahead and do it. So like on our trips up to Seattle, we'll usually stop someplace midway, Santa Rosa, sometimes a little farther. I'll fly that leg or she'll fly that leg, stop, have lunch, switch seats, continue on. It's very nice.
Yeah, it's a beautiful plane. What do y'all play, rock, paper, scissors to see who gets to fly?
Sometimes, but usually her preference tends to be to fly the first leg on the longer trips, because I think that way she can get her flying done and then relax. So she'll typically do the first leg and I'll do the second.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Okay, so how did you get, at the end of this, you decided that, hey, I'm going to Australia and you're going to fly in Australia. You didn't fly yourself there, correct?
That's correct. We ended up flying aircraft that are based here, VH registered aircraft that are based here in Australia.
Okay, so walk us through how that happened. How did you get to a place? Obviously, it's a vacation where you said, "Hey, I want to go see the continent of Australia," and How did you go about making that happen?
Oh, sure. So as I mentioned earlier, I've been here, I don't know, 25 times since about 2000, mostly work related and primarily on the East Coast, New South Wales, Victoria, little bit of Queensland. But the genesis of the flying trip actually was another podcast. And this is going back to about 2011. There was, and they're now doing it again. There was a podcast called Plane Crazy Down Under, excuse me, where the two Australian pilots would talk about Australian aviation. And I remember listening to this, 2011 or so timeframe, thinking, God, that sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. So I started looking into whether or not there were organizations that help put together that type of trip. And there's the company called Air Safaris International that this was doing it and still is. And I signed up at that time to do a trip in early 2012. But I had to cancel it because I was changing jobs and I didn't think it would be a really good idea to show up at my new job and say, oh, by the way, I'm going to be gone now for a month. Oh, I'll see you guys later. Just would not have been the way to get my, to do an entry. So,
Right.
Time goes by, and at some point, I don't remember, about 2 years ago, maybe a little less, Ann and I were talking about wanting to do another flying trip. We've done a couple of trips up to Canada. I mentioned the one up to Churchill, and we've been out to Prince Edward Island. And those were actually organized through COPA, the Cirrus Owners and Pilots Association, which, even though we didn't have a Cirrus and we had the redheaded stepchild TTX, they were a lot of fun. They let us come along. So I decided to get back in touch with Claire McEwen, the gentleman who had put together the Air Safaris trip. I said, you still do this? Oh, yeah, I'm still doing it. So we signed up for a trip here in Australia that was essentially 4 weeks, as mid-September to mid-October of last year. And of course, it doesn't mean you just can come in and say, hey, I'm a United States registered pilot, blah, 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 let me fly your airplanes. In order to be able to fly a VH registered aircraft as a U.S. certificate holder, there is, as you would expect, the whole procedure you have to go through with CASA, which is Australia's equivalent of the FAA. And it takes several months, primarily because of the bureaucracy. And it's not particularly difficult, but there can be some little nitpick steps that if you don't do them right, you have to do them again. And unfortunately, they don't tell you right away that, oh, you haven't done this correctly. But in essence, what you have to do is provide them with certified copies of your latest logs, your medical, your FAA, your certificate. You have to get a report from the FAA in Oklahoma City sent directly to them saying that, yes, you didn't have any violations, et cetera, and a few other things. And then if you do all that, you get a certificate from CASA called a certificate of validation, which will give you a specified time period that you can fly a VH registered airplane in Australia. So that's the first step. Then, of course, you have to have an airplane. You might have the certificate, but you plane to fly. And that's where Claire and his company came in, because his company's been doing this around the world for about 25 years. And what he does and make the arrangements with people to rent their aircraft, and you go out and get checked out in the airplane by an instructor, et cetera, et cetera. And then you're ready to go. You get a big book of CASA regulations, big printed book about this thick, and you start leaping through it and you start going on trips. And of course, the first time you take off and you're in foreign airspace, for lack of a better word, you're both kind of like, as Ann and I admitted to each other later, God, we were both kind of scared. What this is going on? But, needless to say, I mean, airplanes are airplanes. They fly the same way. ATC in Australia is really very similar to the U.S., with the exception that the vast majority of the country is uncontrolled airspace. So that's a long segue into how I ended up doing this trip, what we had to do to be able to fly here. And the nice thing about the way the trip was arranged was that our job was just to fly. Once we got here, we weren't having to make hotel reservations, anything else. That was all taken care of for us. There were a total of 4 aircraft on this trip. So our job was just to have fun flying, which we certainly did.
There's 4 other airplanes that are going the same places you're going as you
Yeah.
go through Australia. That sounds cool.
Yeah, there were a total of 4 aircraft. So the 3 of them were flown by U.S. pilots. Although one guy was also a U.S. Canadian citizen. And the 4th was Claire and a lead pilot. So we had, person going ahead, checking the weather. They would also help out if we needed to change accommodations and stuff. But the rest of us were, flying along in not in formation, but a nice long line. So the lead pilot was flying a Saratoga. We were flying in 1975 Cessna 172. I don't remember which model, maybe an M model. Very, very well-loved airplane with just under 10,000 hours on the tack. And then there was a 182 RG, and there was a 1969 Cessna Cardinal. So all normally, all flying roughly same speeds, and we would stagger our departures so that we wouldn't, we'd be arriving a little bit separated. But yeah, most we'd be able to exchange things on air to air. What's the weather like? What do you see? Is there something on the ground you want to look at? Oh yeah, go over and look at it. So we weren't just doing this alone. We had a group. It was nice.
Yeah. Was everything VFR?
Absolutely. There was no intention to fly IFR. Of course, the aircraft that we were flying did not have the capability to go IFR. I had bought and brought along a Sentry, so I had an AHRS portable, just in case. Right. So in emergency, we could have flown at IFR, but otherwise it was all VFR flying, about all 40 hours of it. The highest we ever got to is about 7,500 feet, just to try to get out of some thermal turbulence. But the majority of it was down low altitude. Yes, using GPS navigation, but we all had big, paper charts, which is kind of fun, and using pilotage and making our way on essentially a big rectangle from the eastern part of Queensland, from out near Brisbane, out to the center of the country at Ayers Rock and Alice Springs, up north, up to the Gulf of Carpentaria, and out to some of the islands out there we landed on, and then back east and then back south.
Okay, so let's break these down. Did you leave Sydney?
No, we actually met in Brisbane. The airport we departed out of, though, is called Toowoomba, which is probably about, I would guess about 75, 80 miles west of Brisbane. It's up at around 1,500, 1,600 feet. So it's actually on the other side of the Great Dividing Range. And that was our departure and and our destination at the very end.
Okay, so you left there. I'm going to pick 4 different segments on the,
okay.
The first segment, or tell me something cool that you saw in the first segment.
Oh gosh. So we pretty much left there and just went west. And literally once you go west from there and maybe, after an hour or two flying, it is empty. And not just like the United States, Southwestern desert. I mean, this is empty, empty, empty. You don't see another trace of humanity. You don't see roads. You don't see anything else. It's actually very flat and can sometimes be a bit of a disorienting terrain because there are rivers that meander through it. They're often dry. One dry stream bed looks like another. There's not a lot of relief to the terrain, but you could start to get some sense as we were heading toward the middle of the country that there was definitely some geological diversity and topographic diversity. So we ended up going west, and one of the first places that comes to mind that was pretty spectacular. There's a kind of a lake that's in the very much northern part of South Australia called Lake Eyre, Eyre, which is known for birding, but it isn't a permanent lake. It's a lake that, when you get a certain amount of rainfall, the lake fills up, and then their year was perfectly dry. And because of the minerals and the surrounding terrain, when you're flying over the shores of this lake, it's just this incredible palette. Now, blues, every shade of blue you could ever think of, pinks, green. It's almost surreal. At one point we're looking down, and like Ann said, something like it looks like we're flying through a Monet. Looking at all this just amazing landscape, and seeing it from an aircraft, and not where you can actually see a large part of it was a treat. You don't get to see that from the ground. Other things out that way, we ended up spending the night in a town called Birdsville, which has a permanent population of about perhaps 200 people. They have a event there every year where there's a camel race that brings in several thousand. It's a big event for the town. And after that, it just goes to nothing because it gets to be very, very, very hot in the summertime. And it's on the eastern edge of the Simpson Desert, which is one of the world's largest deserts in terms of the terrain, the distance, and also these gigantic sand dunes that they have. So we land the night before sunset. We all trekked out west in a basically a gigantic dune buggy to watch the sun go down over this red iron earth sand. And again, knowing that there's nothing out there. You keep on going west, you're going to go a couple hundred miles before you find anything that passes for civilization. Eventually on those legs, about the farthest east that we went was Ayers Rock, which is where Uluru is, and the Olgas. spent a couple of days there. They have an air tour route that you can fly around boats. So we were, taking pictures of the rocks from the air, and then spent a few days at Alice Springs, which is essentially right in the center of the country.
Right. Was Ayers Rock worth it? Like when I think of Australia, I think of that. Most people think of that rock to some degree. The Great Barrier Reef, Sydney, Melbourne, and the Rock. Was it worth seeing?
Yeah, short answer is yes. Both from the ground and from the air. It was, it like a lot of these, large things, you don't get a sense of the size initially. You're flying along. We were approaching it from the southeast, and you see this like bump on the horizon because it's a very, very flat horizon. Oh, what's that? Wasn't no big deal. And you realize after you've flown another 10, 20 minutes, well, that bump is, it's still out there. It hasn't gotten any closer. It's kind of like when you're approaching Greenland and you start to see the mountains, and it seems like it takes forever for them to actually get there because the scale is so great. The Rock is like that. And then the Rock, the colors change with the lighting. It's not just this big ochre thing sitting in the desert. Sometimes it's washed out. Sometimes it's much sharper. You can understand why, the Aboriginal folks feel the way they do about it. The modern man feels the way about it too. It's hard just to look at it and say, I'm a geologist, and it's just a whatever. It is something that just the scale, it has a presence, I guess is the best way of putting it. Yeah. Was it worth? So yeah, it was definitely worth seeing, and then seeing it from the ground and from the air. Same thing, sunrise, sunset, the entire time.
It almost seems to me that the size of the rock is one thing, but the size of the backdrop, meaning the desert that it's in, is the other side of it. I look forward to seeing it in that regard as well.
Yeah, that's a astute observation, because it's a large monolithic thing that is surrounded again by flat desert. It stands up out of the plain, and because of that, it's dominating it. Your eye can't help but be drawn to it because of that.
Right. Okay, so you left Ayers Rock and you went where?
So we went from there to Alice Springs, which is a town in Northern Territory. That's about 20,000 people or so. Spent a few days there. They have a beautiful, like a desert museum, living museum with a lot of the desert animals that, whereas we spent most of the day there just roaming around. It was fantastic. And then from there, the idea was, all right, now we're going to go north, and we're going to go to northern Queensland, and eventually we're going to end up out in the Gulf of Carpentaria, which is off the north coast. And this is where, again, we both got to do some flying that we don't normally get to do. So up to that point, everything we landed on, paved runways. Ayers Rock has a tower. Alice Springs has a tower. Fairly similar to flying, say, in the United States in terms of even the uncontrolled airports. But now we're going to places where the runway is compacted dirt, and the refueling is from a drum. And you're staying at like Roadhouse. We spent the night at a place called Hell's Gate Roadhouse, which is in northern Queensland, dirt runway, relatively, a Bush pilot would laugh at me, but, there's on the western approach end, there's a rock you got to kind of slide around on final and land. The only place, next civilization, 200 kilometers. And it's there partly because it's on the one road that's going along the northern part of Queensland. And it's there because they have a small station, which is one of these, an Australian term for like a ranch holding of it. But you're talking about their small station was just under 1 million acres, and that's small. Yeah. Wow. And they run cattle, and the stations are that large because in order to support a reasonable herd of cattle, you have to have lots and lots of land because of the rainfall and being what it is, and that you don't have a lot of feed. So they have these tremendous ranges to let the cattle graze. So, again, different. I've never landed an airplane on dirt runways. I've never had to sit there with the rotary pump, putting fuel in, a hose, putting fuel in the tanks. And then from that point, it was, now we're going to go up to the Gulf. So we're about 17 degrees south. So we're getting, closer to the equator, and spent a few days on one of the islands in the southern part of the Gulf that had first discovered, at least by Europeans in the 1600s. Another total isolated spot, dirt runway. The people who owned the place, they've owned it for 20 years. It's like a little resort town. Just if you want a place to relax for a couple of days and not have to worry about the world, it's a pretty good spot to do it.
Pretty good spot to be.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
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 Cool. And did you, I also think of the Great Barrier Reef. Did you, while you were up in that part of the world, did you make it there?
Oh yeah. That was our next stop. So that was Swears was as far north as we got. And then we're going back east. And we ended up going pretty much due east along the North Queensland coast, along the base of the Cape York Peninsula, and wound up in the town of Cairns, which is off the reef. And then we flew out to an island called Hamilton Island, which is part of the reef, and spent several days there, snorkeling, just enjoying the scenery. The Coral Sea, which I had been to before, is another you run out of superlatives. Same thing with the spectacular. The waters are clear. It's blue. The colors in the reef are amazing. It's the stuff that you don't get an appreciation for in a photograph. And even as a descriptor, I think the descriptions are poor. It's something you have to experience to really have some understanding of it. You can write about it all you want, but that doesn't. I don't think unless you're a Hemingway-esque writer, doesn't do it justice. But yeah, we went out there. Flew some fairly long over water stretches with but we had all sorts of survival gear in the aircraft. So and on those legs we're wearing life vests and stuff. And then from that point it was eventually going back south and going back to ending up in Toowoomba, and where we had picked up the airplane in the first place. It was just under 4,000 nautical miles, the whole trip, the flying part, and it was just over 40 hours, which as it turned out, when I looked at our logbooks, we had split it pretty much right down the center. And would we do it again? The short answer, of course, is yes. And in fact, we're planning to do another trip like this here next year. But this will be on the west side. It'll be starting and finishing in Fremantle and going up. And Deanna spent a night in Broome, I think, on her trip in the Phenom. We're going to go up that far, go up to Darwin for the Kimberleys, and then work our way south. Same group.
I would either one of those I would be all for, but there's something about the western side of Australia that lures me, that I just want to go see it. I don't know. So I'm excited to hear about your trip. Will that be next year or the year after?
It should be March, April of 2026. So next year. Yeah. Sooner than I think.
Right. Did Air Safaris, did they plan everything like hotels and from the flying side of things, they had fuel sitting there for you? Was all the planning through Air Safari?
Yes. And that just, as you can imagine, having never done this, it took a tremendous load off our mind. So yeah, we had the lead pilot, we had, briefings, they took care of getting all the charts for us. There's a electronic chart too that they use here called Oz Runways, which is actually owned by ForeFlight, and it's very similar. But we all got subscriptions for that. When we had to make some change in reservations because of weather, Claire took care of it. I wasn't on the phone trying to deal with this and that. So it just made it that much easier in that you're not having to do anything except just fly the airplane, enjoy it.
Right. No autopilot, right?
No, no, that's where like two pilots. This airplane had, your basic 6-pack that worked. It had maybe 1.5 VHF radios, because we had one that worked well, and we had one that was a bit temperamental. It was a comm that the NAT. We had one VOR that, same thing. It didn't work. There was an ADF, which was, pretty much, it's almost useless. And that was it. So yeah, so it was all hand flying, which was great because it's something that neither of us have done a lot of, for many years, because you don't, right? You fly the M350 or the other aircraft. You primarily fly them at cruise and autopilot. Sure, you take off and you land with the, doing hand flying. I like to hand fly sometimes at that altitude. We both do, but it's also fatiguing, and this was just using your hand on the trim wheel and all the stuff that you did back in primary instruction, but haven't done in a while.
Yeah. Did you have to pay for the airplane for you, and then you could put as many people as you want on board? Or is it you and Ann, and each of y'all had to pay a separate price? How does it work? Do you just,
Sure. So since there were two pilots, there was a little bit of an extra charge because of the check rides and things that we both had to do. That was it. So the cost of the trip included the rental of the airplane, and it included everything we needed to be able to fly it, like getting the check ride. So one thing it did that the trip did not include was cost of fuel. So we paid for that separately, but otherwise everything else was included.
And the cost of fuel is expensive or cheap?
It's a little more expensive than the U.S., but at the same time, right now, then and now, the U.S. dollar is pretty strong. I mean, right now it's like 60 cents U.S. to $1 Australian. So the cost was actually pretty reasonable. I mean, the nice thing was the available for most of the airports, except for the ones up far north where we had to arrange for fuel. It's the same as you'd have it in the U.S. You pull up to a browser, there's a credit card reader, you do all the same things, and you're ready to go. So 100 low lev was by and large pretty available.
Gotcha. And how long have you been in Australia this trip?
On this trip now, I've been here since Sunday, so just 3 days. This is a 1 week trip. It's pretty fast.
Just a work trip that you're on right now, right?
It's a work trip.
Okay. And when you did this, what month was your flying trip?
It was mid-September through mid-October of last year.
Okay, so that's like their spring, right?
Correct. Yeah, and the trip was deliberately scheduled then because you start getting much farther into the summer, you get into the monsoons up north, and then you have the convective activity and such that really isn't it's not conducive to flying light aircraft. And we really had, with the exception of that one day where we had to end up in Cairns instead of someplace else, the weather was pretty good. I mean, we had a couple of times when you're going around isolated cells, but that's no different.
Right.
It's primarily just severe clear. Daytime temps were in the 70s to 90s Fahrenheit.
Yeah. And did you 70s to 90s, so reasonably comfortable in that respect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so no problem at all. Well, as far as it being spring and y'all being in a desert, no green anything, right?
A little bit. It would depend on how much rain that particular area had received. Some of the rivers were actually fairly full, and there was green. You could see them, from a distance because of the green along the riverbanks. But yeah, the overall appearance out there is it's different shades of brown.
Right.
Until you get up a lot, the East Coast where you have the rains, it's obviously lush as can be. And the North Coast was actually pretty dry as well. I was surprised. The islands out in the Gulf get a little bit of, a fair amount of rain, but they're sandy. So there's not a lot of stuff that grows in that soil beyond some grasses and things.
Right. What about, was all your flying in the morning and in the evening just to avoid the bumps of the desert?
Yeah, we tried to do it in the morning. The longest leg we did those about 5.5 hours, with flying with a couple of stops. So that wasn't, that one was all day. And yeah, there were a couple of times when I was wishing we could get up even higher. I think I mentioned the highest we ever got to was like either 75 or maybe 8,500 feet, which for that 172, that was come on, you can do it. That was a real stretch, but yeah, because the thermal turbulence down low would get, like flying in the U.S. or any place high, it would get pretty bumpy, not comfortable at all.
Not comfortable. No, it'd be highly uncomfortable. Okay. You fly a PA-46 and you have but it sounds like you got a lot of flight time and a good pilot, do all this. Do you think an average American pilot could handle this without any trouble?
Yeah, they could. I think that anybody with the average flying skills and an open mind, and would do just fine. It's not really any different than flying in the United States. There's some of the terminology is a bit different. And some of the pattern entries and things are slightly different. But, all in all, it's the airplanes you're going to come across are generally the same. The main thing is just to not approach it. You have a little trepidation, we all do, but, just look, they're not going to blow you out of the sky if you make a mistake. They won't. You're not going to get left behind somewhere. Just go out and enjoy it. The other people on the trip, there was one guy was a retired Air Canada captain, so beaucoup hours. Another guy was a retired traffic controller with a couple thousand hours, I think, in his career, and nobody had any trouble. I wouldn't worry about it.
Did you know those people that were on the trip prior to the trip?
No, I did not. We all met in Brisbane. And we had a get together the night before we left there to go to Toowoomba to start working, getting our check rides and getting ready to depart.
And at the end of the trip, good friends?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In fact, one of the couples is going to also be going on the trip in Western Australia here next year.
There you go.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, I think I'm excited. I will tell you, I've flown a lot around the world. Here's the thing. The airplane doesn't care where it's at. As far as, is there air there? And of course there is. You're pushing air down to be able to stay up in the air. And the airplane doesn't care. It's really just going to come down to local laws and rules, but the airplane doesn't care. The airplane's going to do the same thing it always does. And so flying in another country, it really comes down to logistics and their common ways of doing things. But Australia seems like a place where aviation is so useful in the sense that you have big distances to go over. And if you live anywhere out in the desert areas and you're going to want an airplane to go wherever you're going to go. So aviation's integral to the life of Australia.
It is. And you a lot of both when you're flying in the outback and even along the islands out there off the East Coast, you look down and you see dirt strips here, there, and everywhere. There'll be a ranch house with a dirt strip, or there'll be an island with a dirt strip, and think, yeah, that's perfect. It's like flying around West Texas to see the same thing, right? That's the way people get around. And there are, some of the places we stopped, they were working airplanes. There were people with, the caravan that they were rolling 55-gallon drums into, or, with the Bonanza with all the seats out except for the front two and loading stuff in it. Yeah, it is. You basically have a country which is the size of the United States, the continental U.S., has a population less than California, and the majority of that population is concentrated along primarily the East Coast, with on the west side, the area around Perth and Fremantle. Everything else is just empty, and there are very few roads. Even some of the main roads along, like from Alice Springs up to the coast, that road was only recently paved within the last 20 years. Paved. Before that, it was dirt. So air travel is it's essential. And they do have a fair number of VH registered aircraft here. I think it's around 10 or 12,000, something like that. So it's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's an impressive place, and I look forward to seeing it one day. It sounds like you just have a little bit of a love affair with Australia, in having been there so many times and wanting to go back, and now wanting to see it from an aerial perspective. I envy your love of a foreign country and then the willingness to go see it in a different way.
Well, thank you, Joe. Yeah, I've traveled a fair amount, not as many countries as you've hit, but a fair number, both in the Western Pacific and over in Europe. And part of it is that this feels a lot. Australia reminds me a lot of California, and it's also, as you can imagine, it's always easier traveling in English-speaking countries, especially if you're doing something technical. But definitely a place that I've had an affinity for ever since my first trip here. Same with New Zealand, and that goes back to being the first time I visited there was in college. You just it's something we all have in our life. You end up someplace, and for some reason it clicks. Whatever that is, is it the people? Is it the terrain? Is it whatever? There's something about particular locations that just resonate. And this one in New Zealand have definitely done that for me.
What do you do for a living? Tell me what. Yeah, how do you pay for this aviation addiction you've got?
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm a physician, specifically a radiation oncologist, which is using various forms of radiation to treat cancer. And it's very small specialty in its own right. But I, by accident, years ago, got involved in a even smaller subset of what's a small subset. So the type of radiation therapy I'm involved in does not use X-rays, which is how most people get radiation treatment. We use subatomic particles, specifically protons. And the reason for that is that they stop. So you can, if you do your treatment appropriately, you can radiate a target, whether it's in the brain or in the lung, the breast, anywhere in the body, and you can put your dose on target and the particles will stop in the target. They don't go beyond it, which means that you can markedly reduce the complications. I can treat something and not, I can treat a brain tumor and not treat the optic nerve next to it. And when I first started in this 30 plus years ago, there was a grand total of one facility in the United States that could do this work in clinical scale. now there's nearly 50, and where you're at in East Texas, you've got the University of Texas, MD Anderson has actually 2 centers that can do this, and UT Southwestern up in Dallas and a bunch of others. But what's brought me to Australia on the majority of these trips has been this type of work. The Australians are finally completing their own first facility down in Adelaide. And we have meetings periodically to discuss the progress and next steps and such. That's been my excuse to come over here for a lot of it. I came over here also to watch the Olympics in 2000, which was just spectacular. But mostly it's been work related. And yes, do I use work to fund my addiction? Oh, yeah. And you'll hear no argument from me out about that. Oh,
I turned my work
definitely.
into an or my
There you
addiction
go.
into work. So it's all good. Yeah. Yes. Are we flying somewhere? Yes, it's a business expense.
Of
No doubt
course.
about it. No,
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
and that is so interesting. I'm telling you, I've it seems to me in my life, I've had some of my best friends and some of my dearest people around me that have gotten cancer that are looking for treatment in that special time. And I just think there's a special place for people like you that help people in that tough time. I think it's
Well,
great.
thank you. Appreciate that. And I often get asked, isn't it a depressing job? How do you deal with cancer patients? And, my response is, it's not. For one thing, cancer is curable. And that's a message which you don't get a lot of in the popular press, because you always hear the failures, the tragedies. But the reality is we do a pretty good job of curing it, getting better, a bunch of little victories. And you look at other things that people deal with in medicine, like we're not curing diabetes yet, and we're not curing a lot of other issues. We can treat them, but we can't make them go away. And of course, the other is that when you work with cancer patients, both adults and kids, which I work with both, they're easily among the most appreciative people that you'll ever come across. And not just they appreciate what you're doing, but many of them will tell you. And when I first realized this, I thought it was crazy, but it's not. They'll tell you the disease has changed their life, and in almost all cases, it's been a change for the better. Which, again, you first hear that and think that's nuts, but no, it's true. So yeah, it's been a fun career. I'm certainly still enjoying it. I'm, wondering how much longer to enjoy it. But then that gets back to the addiction part, right? Because I know a couple of years ago I sent you a message. Well, it's in the next step, right? Because I had sent you a note a couple of years ago about, well, here's why we got the M350 as opposed to buying an M500 turboprop. And that looks great when I wrote it. And of course now the last year and a half, climbability and such, to be able to, because that's one thing with the M350, we fly it in the high teens, low 20s. That's what the plane is for. And yeah, taking 40 minutes to get to 35 minutes to get to altitude, it can get up there, but it takes a while. And then if you're talking about icing conditions and things where you want to have the climb rate, you don't have it. So do I hang out for a few more years so I can get an M500 and enjoy that for a while? Well, we'll see. It certainly is tempting. I've been trying to resist, but I know it's going to happen. I'm only kidding myself, and I'll tell you, I'm just, postponing the inevitables.
You probably are, in the sense of, in other words, sounds like you got a long way to go, and from Southern California up to Seattle area. And if I flew that flight, would a turbine be better? And the answer is, of course. The problem is that you have an affection, if that's the right word, for new airplanes. So a new turbine's not that cheap. So I think this might be a place where you can go for a lesser, go for a older model and still end up with a turbine and end up in a good spot. So, but
yeah, it is awfully tempting. My main resistance is just that I've had such good luck with the 3 planes that I bought new that I hesitate. I have some friends who have bought used but relatively new, like TBM 850, M500, and they've had some issues that are things that come along with owning an airplane. But as we know, the expense is quite a bit greater than in a piston aircraft. So that's still been my hesitation. So, but just tells me I got to work a little harder to get something new. But yeah, you're right. It would easily be double the cost. A new M500 is twice the cost I paid for the new M350 back in 2021.
yeah,
Oh, well.
the other side of it, I get a lot of people that say, should I move up to a turbine? And the answer is, if you can afford it, sure. Why not? Why would you not get a better engine and it's certainly a better engine. But I'm telling you right now, the Piston PA-46 it's a wonderful airplane. If you really get down to when you have a long way to go, from your place to Seattle, I'm guessing it's 3.5 hours or something like that. If it were 3.5 hours, it'd be 3 hours in a turbine. Not that much. It's not earth-shatteringly different. So it really comes down to: do you want the quick climb? Do you want the little bit of increased airspeed? Do you want the reliability that comes with it? And those are all personal decisions. But at the end of the day, an M350 is a wonderful, wonderful airplane.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, you're absolutely right. I tend to remind myself of that constantly. First of all, just being able to own an airplane, let alone, more than one is, it's a combination of luck and hard work, but that's life. And yeah, the trips that we've taken just in the M350 since we got it, 4 years, not even 4 years ago. We rarely for anything in the continental U.S. We rarely use the airlines. We'll take the M350 anytime. If it means leaving a day early and coming back a day later, who cares? It's just that comfortable. And definitely when I think about the integrated avionics in that plane versus the 1993 I owned, which was a nice plane. It was Queen of the Fleet one year at MOPA, if you remember when they used to do that years ago.
yeah.
But God, what a hodgepodge. Screen here for the radar, screen here for the KNS 81, switches, kind of randomly scattered here, there, and everywhere. No, the M-class airplane, the Piper has done a very nice evolutionary change as they progress with the model. I mean, it's the same basic plane that was built 40 years ago. Great, that's fantastic. I like that. I'm not a big fan of being the first adopter of something new. The airplane does everything you want it to do. Does it take me a while to get to altitude? Yeah, it does. Have I canceled a couple of flights because of concerns over icing? Yeah, one. All right, that's still not, is that the end of the world? Heck no. But it's allowed me to do things I would never be able to do. If I think back when I owned my M20F, I did a couple of the same trips in the M20F, and I would not be doing those routinely in that airplane. Whereas in the M350, it's fine. Yeah, let's go. Why not? We're good.
Yeah, I totally get what you're saying. The bottom line is, if you choose to go to a turbine, you made a good decision. If you choose to stay in a piston, you made a good decision. Yeah. They're both wonderful, wonderful airplanes. You really just need to apply what you want. For a guy like you could certainly fly a turbine. There's zero doubt about it. This would be a nice step up for you. But the question is, do you need to? Do you want to? And does Anne want to?
Yeah. Well, she wouldn't have. She told me that's where you want to go. We'll do it. I think she would enjoy flying it. But everything everything you said is true. At some point, the improvements are incremental, right? You go from the normally aspirated to turbocharged to pressurized. Those are big steps, and they're good steps. Now you're making smaller steps, and the delta in cost is considerably greater. But part of it too is, I know at some point, as we all do, the flying game is going to come to an end, and hopefully not for a while, but it just has to. And do I want to experience this? One more evolution in my personal flying while I still can, and I kind of do, and that's also kind of a justification. I've also been leery of having flown. I keep getting off. Let's go fly this one or that. No. I don't. No, I know what's going to happen. It's too tempting if I do. But seriously,
I can already tell you what you're going to do.
Yeah, I know. That's
it. Yeah, you're gonna sell one of these airplanes. I bet you sell the M350. I bet you keep one of the other two. I bet you end up with two airplanes, a turbine, and probably the TTX. That's my bet. We'll see.
You're spot on, Joe. Because that's exactly what I suspect we would do, because that would still give us, when we have to step down at some point, the TTX, very capable airplane for most of what we do. Nice, G2000 avionic, all that good stuff. But yeah, that's.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
You got a mild case of turbine fever. You got a great job where you're helping other people. you love to go a long way and you have a wife that's willing, you might as well put the airplane up for sale.
She's gonna think there was a conspiracy behind it.
No, you can just tell Ann, I approve. I'm good with it. We'll help you sell that. We'll help you buy the other one. It's all good. But it's happening. It's the cat's out of the bag.
Well, when we, I think so. When we see you next, the month after next, I suspect this subject will come up.
I will tell you, just as a little bit of a primer, we're up to 38 people that have signed up for M class, and we're a month and a half out. So we should end up with 30 to 40 PA 46s on the ground. And M classes, if you're thinking about getting any version of a PA 46, the M class is a great place to be because there will be a version of every type there, and multiple versions of each type. And so it's a wonderful one to be able to go from this one to look at that one, to look at this one, to see that, and sit on them, feel them, talk to the owners. It's just a wonderful place to come see all those.
Oh, we had, it was a great weekend when we came out last year. It was about the same time of year, I think. It was again, well worth it. Had a lot of fun. But that's 38 already.
Yeah, 38 signed up so far. So, we'll always lose one or two along the way, but it looks like it's going to be a really good M class this year.
Excellent.
Yeah. All right. Hey, listen, we got Carl Rossi here with a M350, a guy that loves to travel out of California, doctor doing great research or great work in the field of cancer curing. I think that was the word you used, and a lover of Australia and how to fly there. I appreciate you joining the Malibu Guru podcast and being a part of all that we've got going on here at Casey Aviation.
Well, Joe, I appreciate you, first of all, the invitation, and also the work that you've done and continue to do. I've been watching your videos for a long time. It's a great introduction to the aircraft and the nuances of the planes. And I definitely would encourage anybody who, either current owner or, those out there, which there are plenty that are interested, spend some time, watch the videos, come out to East Texas. Why not? Talk to the people who own and maintain them, and you'll go away enriched. You'll probably go away with an airplane too, which is fine, but you'll definitely come out of it and with good information and you feeling like you belong to a really nice community.
It is a great community. I'm here because of the people, not because of the airplane. It's a great airplane, but I'm here for the people. That's for sure. Carl, thanks for joining the Malibu Guru podcast and the Casey Aviation YouTube channel.
You're most welcome. Thank you.